Sometimes the loneliest place in the world is right next to someone who doesn't see you anymore. Clara Brennan knew that feeling all too well. She'd been walking through the Wyoming mountains for 3 days, running from a marriage that had turned into a prison. Half frozen and barely alive, she found an empty cabin buried in snow. What she didn't expect was the man who found her there. Abram Holt had been alone for 9 years, hiding from a world that had taken everything from him. He knew how to survive the brutal winters, but he'd forgotten how to live. When he carried Clara inside and lit the fire, neither of them knew their lives were about to change forever. Could 2 broken people find healing in the wilderness? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first thing Clara noticed when she opened her eyes was the warmth. Not the artificial heat that came from vents and thermostats, but real warmth, the kind that seeped into your bones and made you remember what it felt like to be alive. The second thing she noticed was the pain. Her fingers throbbed with a deep, burning ache that told her she'd come closer to losing them than she wanted to think about. She lay still for a moment, trying to piece together where she was. Rough-hewn log walls, a stone fireplace with flames crackling behind an iron grate, the smell of wood smoke and something cooking, soup maybe, or stew. Above her, exposed beams crossed the ceiling, dark with age and the residue of countless fires. A single oil lamp hung from a hook, casting gentle shadows that danced across the room. The cabin was small. One main room that served as kitchen, living area, and apparently bedroom, since she was lying on what appeared to be the only bed, a simple frame with a thick mattress and heavy wool blankets that smelled faintly of cedar. A wooden table sat near the fireplace with 2 mismatched chairs. Shelves lined one wall, stocked with canned goods, jars of preserves and supplies she couldn't quite make out in the dim light. Everything was meticulously organized, almost military in its precision. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Her head swam, and her body protested with a chorus of aches. "Easy." The voice came from the shadows near the fireplace. Deep, rough from disuse, but not unkind. Clara's eyes found him then. The man stood slowly, unfolding himself from a wooden chair she hadn't noticed. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with broad shoulders that filled out a worn flannel shirt. His hair was dark, shot through with grey at the temples, pulled back in a short ponytail. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but she could see his eyes, dark brown, watchful, carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "My cabin. About 15 miles north of the nearest town, if you're keeping track." He moved to the fire, stirring whatever was in the pot hanging there. "You were in bad shape when I found you. 3 days ago. 3 days." Clara's mind struggled to process that. She remembered walking, remembered the cold that had stopped feeling like cold and started feeling like nothing at all. She remembered seeing the cabin through the trees, remembered thinking it looked like a mirage, something her dying brain had conjured up to comfort her. "The cabin was empty," she said. "I was checking my trap lines." He ladled soup into a wooden bowl, steam rising in the cool air. "Found you on my porch when I got back." "Another hour and you'd have been gone." He brought the bowl to her, and she noticed his hands then. They were large, scarred, the hands of someone who worked with them every day. Clean, though. Everything about him was clean, despite the roughness. He'd cared for her, she realized. Changed her clothes. She was wearing a shirt too big for her, soft from many washings. Treated her frostbite. Kept her alive. "Thank you," she said, and meant it with everything she had. He nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin, and retreated to his chair by the fire. Not unfriendly exactly, but maintaining distance. She understood. He hadn't asked for company. Clara tried the soup. Venison, she thought, with root vegetables and herbs she couldn't name. It was the best thing she'd ever tasted, and she had to force herself to eat slowly, to not gulp it down and make herself sick. "What's your name?" she asked between spoonfuls. Abram Holt. "I'm Clara Brennan." She paused, then added, "Or I was." "I don't know any more." He didn't ask what she meant by that. just nodded again and went back to staring at the fire. Clara finished the soup and set the bowl on the small table beside the bed. Her hands were bandaged, she noticed now, wrapped carefully in clean cloth. Her feet, too. She wiggled her toes experimentally and felt the sting of healing tissue. She'd keep all her fingers and toes, she thought. "That was something. How long can I stay?" she asked quietly. Abram was silent for a long moment. The fire popped and crackled, and somewhere outside, wind moved through the pines with a sound like the ocean. "Until you're strong enough to leave," he said finally. "Or until the snow melts enough to get you down the mountain. Whichever comes first." It wasn't a warm invitation, but it wasn't a rejection either. Clara looked at him across the small space of the cabin and saw something in his posture, in the way he held himself apart. He was protecting something. His solitude, yes, but more than that. He was protecting himself from connection, from the complications that other people brought. She recognized it because she'd been doing the same thing for years, just in a different way. She'd protected herself by becoming smaller, quieter, by taking up less space in her own life until she was barely there at all. "I won't be trouble," she said. "I promise." "Everyone's trouble," Abram replied, but there was no heat in it. Just a statement of fact. Clara lay back down, suddenly exhausted, despite having just woken up. Her body needed more rest, more healing. But her mind was starting to clear, and with clarity came memory. Thomas. The house in Denver with its perfect lawn and perfect furniture and perfect emptiness. The last fight, if you could call it that. Thomas didn't raise his voice, never did. He just spoke to her in that calm, condescending tone that made her feel like a child being scolded. Told her she was being emotional. Told her she should be grateful for the life he'd given her. Told her she wasn't thinking. Clearly, she'd left in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes she was wearing and her grandmother's wedding ring in her pocket, the one she hadn't been able to bring herself to wear for the last 2 years. She'd driven north without a plan, following some instinct she couldn't name. When the car ran out of gas on a mountain road, she'd kept walking. When her phone died, she'd thrown it into the trees. When she couldn't walk anymore, she'd crawled. And then Abram had found her. Clara turned her head to look at him. He sat perfectly still, watching the fire with the patience of someone who'd spent years doing exactly that. On the wall behind him, she noticed something she'd missed before, a set of dog tags hanging from a nail, the metal dull with age. Military, then. That explained the bearing, the organization, the way he'd assessed and treated her injuries with practiced efficiency. "Were you Army?" she asked, his jaw tightened. "A long time ago." She wanted to ask more, but sensed she'd reached the limit of acceptable questions. Instead, she watched the fire through half-closed eyes and listened to the wind outside, and thought about how strange it was that she felt safer here, in a stranger's cabin in the middle of nowhere, than she'd felt in her own home for years. "Abram." "Yeah. Thank you for not asking questions." He glanced at her then, and for just a moment something shifted in his expression. Understanding, maybe? Recognition of a fellow refugee. "We've all got reasons for the things we do," he said. "Yours are your own business." Clara closed her eyes and felt tears slip down her temples into her hair. Not sad tears exactly, just the release of someone who'd been holding themselves together for so long that they'd forgotten what it felt like to let go. When she woke again, it was dark outside. The fire had been built up, radiating steady heat. Abram was asleep in the chair, his head tipped back against the wood, arms crossed over his chest. Even in sleep, he didn't look relaxed. Clara studied him in the firelight and wondered what had brought him here, to this remote cabin, to this life of deliberate isolation. She wondered if he'd run from something too, or if he was running towards something, some version of peace that could only be found in silence and solitude. She pulled the blankets up to her chin and listened to him breathe. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. The days blended together in a rhythm Clara had never known before. Wake with the sun, stoke the fire, Eat whatever Abram prepared, oatmeal with dried berries, eggs from somewhere she hadn't yet discovered, bread he baked himself in a Dutch oven. Watch him move through his morning routine with the efficiency of long practice. Try not to be in the way. She was stronger now. The color had returned to her cheeks, and the pain in her fingers and toes had faded to a dull ache. She could stand without getting dizzy, could walk around the cabin without needing to rest. But she still felt fragile, like something not quite solid, as if a strong wind might blow her apart. Abram spoke little, but his actions said what words didn't. He showed her where things were kept, how to bank the fire at night so it would last until morning, which water was for drinking and which was for washing. Small lessons in survival, offered without comment or expectation. On the fourth morning, while she was attempting to wash her few clothes in a basin of heated water, Abram emerged from a corner of the cabin carrying her coat. He'd found it in the snow near where she'd collapsed, he explained. It had been frozen solid, but he'd thawed it slowly by the fire. Thought you might want to go through the pockets, he said, laying it across the table, before I hang it to dry proper. Clara approached the coat like it was something dangerous. In a way, it was. It belonged to her old life, the one she'd walked away from. Her hands trembled as she reached into the first pocket, a tissue, some loose change, a grocery receipt from 3 weeks ago that felt like it was from another lifetime. The second pocket held her grandmother's ring, wrapped in a scrap of cloth. She'd forgotten putting it there. Clara held it up to the light, watching the simple gold band catch the fire's glow. Her grandmother had worn it for 60 years, through good times and hard times, and everything in between. Clara had planned to wear it too once. Before, Thomas had insisted on buying her something more appropriate for a man in his position. She tucked the ring back into the cloth and set it aside. The inside pocket, she'd forgotten about the inside pocket. Her fingers found paper, stiff and crinkled from the wet and cold. She pulled it out slowly and her stomach dropped. The letter. Thomas's letter. She'd read it so many times before she left that she could recite it from memory. Every word chosen carefully, designed to sound loving while cutting deep. Every sentence a reminder of her inadequacy, her instability, her failure to be the wife he deserved. Clara stood there holding the letter. And something in her face must have changed, because Abram looked up from where he was sorting through his tackle box. "Bad news?" he asked. "Old news," she said, but her voice cracked on the words. Abram set down the fishing line he'd been examining. He didn't move toward her, didn't invade her space, just waited with that infinite patience he seemed to have for everything. "It's from my husband," Clara said finally. The word tasted bitter. "Was my husband? I don't know what he is now." "You married?" "Legally, yes. In every other way that matters, no." She looked down at the letter, at Thomas's perfect handwriting, all straight lines and careful loops. Even his handwriting was controlled. "I left him. Just walked out in the middle of the night and kept going until I couldn't go anymore." Abram was quiet for a moment. "Then you want me to burn it?" The question was so simple, so direct, that Clara almost laughed. Yes, she wanted to say, burn it and everything it represents. But she needed to read it one more time. Needed to remind herself why she'd left. "Not yet," she said. She unfolded the letter carefully, even though her hands wanted to crumple it into a ball. The paper was water-stained. Some of the ink had run, but Thomas's words were still readable. "Clara, I've tried to be patient with you. God knows I've tried. But this latest episode has made it clear that you need help. Professional help. I've made an appointment with Dr. Morrison for next Tuesday. Please don't fight me on this. I know you think I don't understand what you're going through, but I do. You're unhappy. You feel unfulfilled. These are normal feelings that many women experience, especially at your age. But running away from your problems isn't the solution. I'm willing to forget about the scene you made at the Hendersons' dinner party if you're willing to get the help you need. We can move past this. We can be happy again, or at least content. Isn't that enough? You have a good life, Clara, a beautiful home, financial security, a husband who provides for you. Most women would be grateful for what you have. I'm asking you to be one of them. Come home. Let me take care of you. Let me fix this. Clara read it twice, and with each reading she felt something inside her harden. Not anger exactly. Something colder than that. Clarity. He thinks I'm broken, she said aloud. He thinks I need to be fixed, like a malfunctioning appliance. Abram had gone back to his tackle box, giving her privacy. But she could tell he was listening. The Hendersons' dinner party, Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. You want to know what happened? I told the truth. Someone asked if I was happy, and instead of lying like I always did, I said no. That's it. That's the scene I made. I told the truth, and Thomas was so mortified he couldn't look at me for 3 days. She folded the letter slowly, precisely, creasing the edges with deliberate care. He never hit me, she said. Never even raised his voice. But he made me feel small. Made me feel like everything I thought and felt was wrong. Like I was the problem, always the problem. And if I could just be different, better, quieter, more grateful, then everything would be fine. Abram looked up then, and his eyes were dark with understanding. But you were disappearing? Yes. The word came out as barely more than a whisper. I was disappearing, and the worst part was that I was helping. I was erasing myself little by little, and I told myself it was what good wives did. They compromised. They adapted. They made themselves smaller so their husbands could be bigger. She walked to the fireplace, the letter still in her hand. But she didn't throw it in. Not yet. Do you know what finally made me leave? She asked. Abram shook his head. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed. Really laughed. Not that polite little sound you make at parties. I tried to think back and I couldn't remember. That's when I knew if I stayed, I would die. Maybe not physically, but everything that made me me would be gone. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Clara looked toward the window and saw dark clouds building over the mountain peaks. The light in the cabin dimmed, taking on that peculiar quality that comes before a storm. Storm's coming, Abram said, standing. Big one from the look of it. We'll be snowed in for a few days at least. Clara turned from the fire to look at him. What does that mean? Means you can't leave even if you wanted to. Means I can't get you down the mountain to town. Means we're stuck here together until it passes. He said it matter-of-factly, without judgment, but Clara heard the question underneath. Can you handle that? Can you handle being trapped here with a stranger? I'm not afraid of storms, she said. Maybe you should be. Mountain storms aren't like what you're used to. They can last days, sometimes a week. Clara looked at the letter in her hand, then at the fire, then at Abram, this gruff, damaged man who'd saved her life without asking for anything in return, who'd given her space to heal without demanding her story, who understood somehow that she needed time before she could face the world again. If I'm staying, she said slowly, then I need to learn. I can't just be a guest here, taking up your space and eating your food. Teach me, Abram's eyebrows rose slightly. Teach you what? Everything. How to survive up here, how to keep the fire going, how to cook, how to do whatever needs doing. I don't want to be helpless anymore. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile but close. Respect, maybe. It's not easy. I don't want easy. I want useful. The first snowflakes began to fall outside, fat and heavy, the kind that meant business. Abram moved to the window and looked out at the gathering storm. All right, he said. But you do what I tell you when I tell you. No arguing, no explaining. Up here, hesitation can kill you. I understand. And if this is about proving something to yourself, forget it. This is about survival. Nothing romantic about it. Clara thought about Thomas's letter, about years of feeling useless and decorative. That's exactly what I need. Abram nodded once, that sharp dip of his chin she was learning to recognize as acceptance. First lesson starts now. That fire needs feeding, and we need to secure the shutters before the wind picks up. You're going to help. He didn't wait for her response, just moved to the door and pulled on a heavy coat. Clara grabbed her own coat, still damp but wearable, and followed him out into the first real snow she'd seen since she'd arrived. The wind hit her like a wall, stealing her breath. Snow swirled in the air, already coating the ground in a thick blanket. Abram was at the woodpile, and Clara hurried to join him. Carry what you can, he shouted over the wind. Make as many trips as you need. We'll stack it inside, close to the fire. Clara grabbed an armload of wood, the bark rough against her healing hands. It was heavier than she expected, and by the time she'd made it back inside, her arms were shaking. But she stacked it where Abram indicated and went back for more. 4 trips, 5, 6. Her shoulders burned and her breath came hard, but she didn't stop. Abram worked beside her, carrying twice as much, but never making her feel inadequate about it. This was simply the work that needed doing. When the wood was stacked and the shutters were secured, they stood inside the cabin, breathing hard, melting snow dripping from their clothes. Abram built up the fire while Clara hung their coats to dry. "That's lesson 1, he said, brushing snow from his beard. "Everything you do up here, you do it before you need to. Waiting until you're desperate is how people die." Clara nodded, too tired to speak. Her hands throbbed and her back ached, but she felt something else too, something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose, the satisfaction of work that mattered. Outside, the storm intensified. Wind howled around the cabin, and snow fell so thick it was impossible to see more than a few feet beyond the windows. They were cut off from the world completely, isolated in a space no bigger than her old bedroom. But Clara didn't feel trapped. For the first time since she could remember, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. She looked at Thomas's letter, still lying on the table where she'd left it. Then she walked over, picked it up and fed it to the fire. The paper caught immediately, curling and blackening, Thomas's perfect handwriting dissolving into ash. Abram watched, but said nothing. "I'm not going back," Clara said, more to herself than to him. "Whatever happens, whatever it takes, I'm not going back." "Good," Abram said simply. "Because that storm's going to last at least 3 days, and I'm going to teach you how to keep yourself alive." Clara turned from the fire and met his eyes. "Then let's begin." The storm lasted 5 days. 5 days of wind that screamed around the cabin like something alive and hungry. 5 days of snow that piled up past the windows, creating a world of white silence, broken only by the howling outside. 5 days of Clara learning what it meant to survive. Abram woke her before dawn every morning, when the cabin was coldest and the fire had burned down to embers. The first lesson was always the same. Read the fire, understand what it needed, give it life again. Not too much wood or you'd waste it. Not too little, or you'd lose the coals and have to start from scratch. "Fire's like anything else worth keeping," Abram said on the second morning, watching her work. "You've got to tend it regular. Ignore it and it dies. Smother it with too much attention and you kill it just the same." Clara heard the subtext but didn't comment. She focused on the task, on placing the kindling just right, on coaxing flame from ember with patience she didn't know she possessed. By the third morning, she could revive the fire without his guidance. She saw the approval in the way he nodded, then moved on to the next lesson without ceremony. Cooking came next. Not the kind of cooking she'd done in Denver, following recipes from cookbooks, measuring everything precisely. This was practical cooking, making food stretch, using what you had, wasting nothing. "Beans take forever up here," Abram explained, stirring a pot that had been simmering since the night before. "Water boils at a lower temperature because of the altitude. You've got to plan ahead. Start your dinner at breakfast time." He taught her to make bannock bread in a cast-iron skillet, to stretch venison with root vegetables from his cellar, to make coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Her first attempts were disasters. Bread burned on the outside and raw in the middle. Soup oversalted, coffee bitter as medicine. Abram ate it all without complaint, though she caught him wincing once or twice. "You'll get better," he said simply. "Everything takes practice." On the 4th day, when the storm had settled into a steady snowfall instead of a blizzard, Abram pulled on his heavy coat and boots. "We're going outside," he said. "Need to clear the path to the woodshed before the snow gets any deeper." Clara bundled up in layers, long underwear Abram had provided from somewhere. 2 pairs of wool socks, her coat and a hat he'd knitted himself. She felt like a child dressed by a cautious parent, but when they stepped outside, she understood. The cold was shocking, so intense it made her lungs hurt. The world had been transformed into something alien and beautiful. every tree branch laden with snow, the sky a flat grey that pressed down on everything. The silence was absolute except for their breathing and the crunch of snow under their boots. "Stay close," Abram said. "Easy to get turned around in this, even with the cabin right there." He led her to the woodshed, following a path that was barely visible under 4 feet of fresh snow. They worked in tandem, Abram shoveling while Clara carried the snow away in a bucket, dumping it far enough from the path that it wouldn't drift back. Her arms ached within minutes. Her back screamed at her to stop. Sweat gathered under her layers despite the cold, and her breath came in harsh gasps. But she didn't quit. She watched Abram's steady rhythm and tried to match it, tried to find that place where work became meditation. When the path was clear, Abram didn't lead her back inside. Instead, he walked to a small shed she hadn't noticed before, partially buried in snow. He cleared the door and gestured for her to follow. The shed was dim, lit only by the grey light filtering through a single small window. But Clara could see well enough. Tools hung on the walls in precise order: saws, hammers, planes, chisels. A workbench dominated one wall, scarred from years of use. And there, mounted on pegs above the bench, were 3 axes of different sizes. Abram took down the middle one and held it out to her. The axe was beautiful in a way Clara hadn't expected. The handle was smooth from use, the grain of the wood visible under layers of oil and sweat. The head was perfectly balanced, the edge sharp enough to catch the light. "Made this one myself," Abram said. "Forged the head, fitted the handle, balanced the weight. Took me a month to get it right." Clara took it carefully, feeling the weight of it. Heavier than she'd expected, but the balance was perfect. It felt solid in her hands, real in a way few things had felt to her in years. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. "Because you're going to learn to use it." Abram took down a second axe, slightly smaller. "Wood's our life up here. Fire means survival. No wood, no fire. No fire, no life. Simple as that." He led her back outside to a cleared area near the cabin where logs were stacked, waiting to be split. Snow had already begun to cover their path again, but Abram ignored it. He set a log upright on a wide stump that served as a chopping block. "Watch first," he said. Abram's movements were economical, practiced. He settled his stance, feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent. Raised the axe overhead in one smooth motion. Brought it down with controlled force, letting gravity and the weight of the axe do most of the work. The log split cleanly in 2 with a satisfying crack. "Your turn." Clara set up her log, trying to remember everything she'd seen. Stance, grip, breathing. She raised the axe, wobbling slightly under its weight, and brought it down. The blade glanced off the side of the log and buried itself in the chopping block. The impact jarred her arm so badly she nearly dropped the axe. "Again," Abram said. She pulled the axe free, reset the log, tried again. This time she hit the log square, but the blade barely penetrated. The log didn't split. Again, 15 tries, 20. Her shoulders burned, and her hands, still tender from the frostbite, began to blister inside her gloves. But she kept going, driven by something she couldn't name. Determination, maybe, or stubbornness, or the need to prove to herself that she could do something hard, something physical, something real. On the 23rd swing, the log split. Clara stood there, breathing hard, staring at the 2 halves as if she'd performed magic. Her whole body ached, and she was pretty sure she'd pulled something in her back, but she'd done it. She'd split the log. "Good," Abram said, and the single word felt like a medal. "Now do it again. You need to split enough for today and tomorrow." "That's about 20 logs." Clara looked at the pile of unsplit logs, then at her blistered hands, then back at Abram. He wasn't smiling, but there was something in his eyes that might have been amusement. "You said you wanted to learn," he reminded her. Clara picked up another log. I do." Then stopped talking and swing. She split 19 more logs that day. Some took 1 swing, some took 10, but she split every single one. By the time they went back inside, her hands were bleeding inside her gloves. Her arms felt like rubber, and she could barely lift them above her waist. Abram made her soak her hands in warm water mixed with salt, then bandaged them with a gentleness that surprised her. His own hands were scarred and calloused, but they were steady and sure as they wrapped the cloth. "You did good today," he said, not looking at her. "Better than I expected, really. Most people quit after 5 or 6 logs. Tell themselves they can't do it, or it's too hard, or they'll try again tomorrow." He tied off the bandage and finally met her eyes. "You didn't quit." Clara looked at her bandaged hands, at the blood seeping through the cloth. In Denver, Thomas would have been horrified, would have insisted she stop, see a doctor, take it easy, would have used it as proof that she wasn't capable of taking care of herself. But Abram just taught her how to bandage her hands and expected her to keep going. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll work on your stance. You're putting too much shoulder into it, not enough hip. That's why your back hurts. Tomorrow." Clara couldn't keep the disbelief out of her voice. "You want me to do this again tomorrow?" "Every day until you can split 20 logs without bleeding." He stood and moved to the stove, checking on dinner. "Pain goes away. Skill stays." Clara flexed her fingers carefully inside the bandages. He was right, the pain would fade. But what she'd learned today, the knowledge that she could do hard things, that would stay. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 weeks ago, the one who'd left her car on the side of the road and walked into the mountains with no plan and no survival skills. That woman would have died up here. That woman had been dying anyway, just more slowly. But this woman, the one with blistered hands and aching muscles and a growing sense of her own capability, this woman might actually make it. "Abram," she said as he stirred the pot. "Yeah? Thank you. For teaching me. For not—" She struggled to find the words. "For not treating me like I'm fragile." He glanced at her over his shoulder, and for just a moment, she saw something in his face, understanding, recognition, the knowledge of what it meant to be underestimated, to be seen as less than you were. "You're not fragile," he said quietly. "You walked 3 days through a blizzard. You survived when you should have died. Anyone who can do that isn't fragile. They're just—" He paused, searching for the word. "Lost. And there's a difference." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but blinked them back. "What's the difference?" Abram turned back to the stove. "Fragile things break when you test them. Lost things just need to find their way again." Outside, the storm had gentled to a quiet snowfall. Inside, the cabin was warm and filled with the smell of cooking food. Clara sat at the table, her hands throbbing, her body exhausted, and felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. Hope. The axe leaned against the wall near the door, waiting for tomorrow's work. Clara looked at it and thought about balance, about finding your center, about learning to let the weight of the tool do the work instead of fighting it. Maybe surviving wasn't so different from splitting wood. Maybe it was about finding your stance, trusting your strength, and not being afraid to swing. The photograph fell out of a book on a morning when everything else seemed ordinary. Clara had been looking for kindling, small sticks and bark to help start the morning fire. Abram kept a basket of it near the hearth, but they'd used most of it during a cold snap the week before. She'd remembered seeing some old newspapers and thin books on a bottom shelf, the kind that would burn quick and hot, perfect for coaxing flames from stubborn coals. She pulled out a field guide on edible plants, its pages yellowed and brittle. As she opened it to check if Abram would mind her using it, something slipped from between the pages and drifted to the floor. A photograph, old enough that the colors had faded to that particular shade of washed-out nostalgia, blues gone gray, reds turned pink. But the image was clear enough. 8 men in desert camouflage, standing in front of a helicopter. They were young, some barely more than boys, squinting against bright sun. They held their weapons with casual confidence, and despite the harsh environment, they were smiling. The kind of smile that came from brotherhood, from shared purpose, from knowing the man next to you would die for you if necessary. Clara found Abram immediately. Third from the left, his arms slung around the shoulders of a shorter man with a wide grin. Abram's beard was gone, his hair military short, but it was his eyes that stopped her. They were alive in a way she'd never seen them, bright with something that might have been joy. She heard the door open behind her. Abram stamped snow from his boots and unwound his scarf. Need to check the eastern trapline today, he said. Weather's holding, so... He stopped. Clara turned to find him frozen in the doorway, staring at the photograph in her hands. The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Clara's first instinct was to apologize, to explain, to put the photograph down and pretend she'd never seen it. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the 6 weeks she'd spent learning not to apologize for existing. Maybe it was the genuine curiosity about who this man had been before isolation had carved him down to silence. "I'm sorry," she said, but didn't put the photograph down. It fell out of the plant guide. "I wasn't snooping." Abram crossed the small space in 3 strides and took the photograph from her, not roughly but firmly. He stared at it for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing words he couldn't quite spit out. "You were in the army," Clara said quietly. "Not a question, special forces." His voice was flat, emotionless, the voice of someone reporting facts. 10 years, most of it in places that don't officially exist. He moved to put the photograph back in the book, to hide it away again, but Clara's voice stopped him. "Who were they?" Abram's hand tightened on the photograph. "My unit, my team," he paused. "My brothers were all dead. Everyone in this picture except me." He finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was so raw it made her chest ache. "Ambush. Should have seen it coming. Should have..." He stopped, shook his head. "Doesn't matter. They're gone." "I'm here." Clara thought about running from questions, about the walls people built around their pain. She thought about Thomas, who'd always changed the subject when things got uncomfortable, who'd trained her to smooth over any emotional rough edges, but Abram had never let her hide. He'd made her face her blisters and her failures and her fear. She owed him the same honesty. "How long ago?" she asked. 9 years, almost 10 now. He looked down at the photograph again. "Medic said I was lucky. Took shrapnel in my leg and shoulder, but nothing vital. Lived while everyone else died. Some kind of luck. Is that why you came up here?" "Came up here because I couldn't stand being down there. Couldn't stand the noise, the people, the way everyone kept thanking me for my service, like that meant something. Like it could make up for..." His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "Couldn't stand looking at families, kids, normal life. Everything they'd never have." Clara moved closer, slowly, like approaching a wild animal. "I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Doesn't bring them back." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." She reached out and gently took the photograph from his hand. He tensed but didn't stop her. She looked at the faces again. Young men who'd never gotten old, who'd never come home, who'd died in the desert while Abram lived. "Tell me about them," she said. "What?" "Tell me about them. Not how they died, who they were." Abram stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "Why?" "Because they mattered. Because they were more than their ending." Clara held the photograph carefully, reverently. "Because you've been carrying them alone for almost 10 years, and maybe it's time to let someone else remember them too." She sat down at the table and placed the photograph between them. After a long moment, Abram sat across from her. He didn't speak for so long that Clara thought he might refuse. Then slowly, he reached out and touched the image of the man he'd had his arm around. "That's Martinez. Best gunner I ever worked with, and the worst poker player in the entire United States Army. Lost 3 months' pay in one night. Swore he'd win it back. Never did." The corner of Abram's mouth twitched. "Had a daughter." "She was 2. He carried her picture everywhere, showed it to anyone who'd look." He pointed to another face. "Jensen, Norwegian kid from Minnesota. Could navigate by the stars better than any GPS. Sang opera in the shower, terrible voice, but he didn't care. Was going to propose to his girlfriend when he got home. Had the ring in his pack. One by one, Abram named them. Told their stories. Not the official versions, but the real ones. The nicknames and the quirks and the dreams. Men who'd been reduced to names on a memorial wall became human again in the small cabin. Brought back to life by memory and the safety of someone who wouldn't judge the grief. Clara listened without interrupting. She heard the love underneath the pain, the way Abram's voice softened when he talked about them. She saw how his hands relaxed, how his shoulders dropped as he spoke their names. "We were family," he said finally. "Not by blood, but by choice. Up until the day they died, I'd never felt like I belonged anywhere. Then I lost them all and He stopped, swallowed hard. I couldn't do it again. Couldn't get close to anyone, couldn't risk that kind of loss. So I came up here where there was no one to lose. Until I showed up, Clara said quietly. Until you showed up. Abram met her eyes. And I kept trying to keep my distance, kept telling myself you'd leave as soon as you were strong enough. But you didn't leave. You stayed. You learned. He struggled for words. You became part of this place, part of my days. And now I'm scared, Clara finished, because caring about someone means you could lose them. Yeah. Clara reached across the table and placed her hand over his. His skin was warm, rough with calluses that matched her own now. He didn't pull away. I'm scared too, she admitted. For different reasons, but just as scared. I spent years making myself smaller, safer, trying not to need anyone because needing meant depending and depending meant losing myself. And then I came here and you made me need things again, need purpose and work, and she took a breath. And you, I need you, Abram, not to take care of me, but because you see me, the real me, not the version I think I should be. Abram turned his hand over, threading his fingers through hers. It was the first time they'd truly touched beyond the practical, bandaging wounds, steadying on ice, the necessity of survival. This was something else. This was choice. I don't know how to do this, he said. How to let someone in again? I don't either, Clara said. But maybe we figure it out together. They sat like that for a long time, hands joined across the table, the photograph between them. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, painting the snow gold. Inside, two people who'd been running from pain tentatively reached towards something else. Finally, Abram stood, but he didn't let go of her hand. Come on, still need to check those trap lines. Clara rose with him. Together? Together, he confirmed. He picked up the photograph and looked at it one more time. Then instead of hiding it away, he placed it on the small shelf near the door, propped against the wall where he could see it. Where they both could. They'd have liked you, he said quietly. Martinez especially. He always said I needed someone stubborn enough to put up with me. Clara smiled. I am pretty stubborn. Yeah, Abram said, and this time he did smile, small but real. Yeah, you are. They bundled up and headed out into the cold. But this time, when they walked close enough that their shoulders brushed. This time, when Abram showed her how to read a trail, he stood behind her, guiding her hands with his own. This time, they weren't just surviving together, they were beginning to live. Abram left early on a Tuesday morning, before dawn had fully broken over the mountains. He needed to check his supply cache 5 miles north, a hidden stash of essentials he maintained for emergencies. He'd been putting off the trip for weeks, but with spring advancing and Clara now competent enough to manage the cabin alone for a day, he'd run out of excuses. Clara stood at the door and watched him go, a strange unease settling in her stomach. It was the first time they'd been apart since that night by the fire 2 weeks ago, since the kiss that had changed everything. She told herself she was being foolish. He'd be back before dark. She had plenty to keep her busy, but the unease stayed with her through the morning chores, through splitting wood and checking the thawing vegetable garden plot they'd started preparing. It stayed with her through lunch, eaten alone at the table that felt too big, without Abram across from it. She tried to distract herself with her journal, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, she set it aside and went outside to practice with the fishing rod Abram had been teaching her to use. The stream was running high with snowmelt, the water clear and cold and full of promise. Clara found the spot Abram had showed her, a deep pool where the current slowed and trout liked to rest. She cast her line the way he'd taught her, with a smooth flick of the wrist, and settled in to wait. The peace of it usually calmed her. Today, it just gave her mind room to wonder. What if something happened to Abram out there? What if he fell, or got caught in a late spring storm, or encountered a bear coming out of hibernation? She'd learned enough to know how quickly the mountains could turn dangerous, how little margin for error existed up here. She pushed the thoughts away. Abram knew these mountains better than anyone. He'd survived alone for 9 years. One day wouldn't. The sound of an engine cut through her thoughts. Clara's head snapped up. Engines were rare up here. Abram's truck was the only vehicle for miles, and it sat silent beside the cabin. This sound was coming from the access road, the one that led eventually to town. Her first thought was that Abram had somehow gotten a ride back. But that made no sense. He'd gone on foot with just his pack. And this didn't sound like his truck anyway. Clara reeled in her line and stood, every instinct suddenly screaming at her to hide. She moved quickly back toward the cabin, then stopped. If she went inside, she'd be trapped. If someone was coming, and someone clearly was, she needed to know who and why before they knew she was here. She circled around the back of the cabin and climbed the small rise behind it, the one Abram used as a lookout point. From there, she could see the approach road winding through the trees. A dark SUV appeared, expensive and out of place in the wilderness. It navigated the rough road slowly, carefully, like someone unfamiliar with the terrain. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. The SUV stopped about 100 yards from the cabin. Two men got out, not Abram. One was older, grey-haired, wearing outdoor gear that looked brand new. The other was younger, broader, moving with the careful awareness of someone trained in security or law enforcement. They stood by the vehicle for a moment, surveying the area. Then the older man reached into the SUV and pulled out something Clara couldn't quite see from her vantage point. He walked to a tree near the road and did something to it. When he stepped back, Clara saw what he'd done. He'd posted something on the tree, a flyer of some kind. The men got back in the SUV and drove away. Clara waited until the sound of the engine faded completely before she moved. Every muscle in her body was tense, every nerve on alert. She knew, somehow she knew what that flyer said. She made her way down to the road, approaching the tree slowly, as if the paper itself might attack her. When she was close enough to read it, her worst fears were confirmed. Missing person, the photograph was from her wedding day. She was smiling in it, wearing the dress Thomas had chosen. Her hair styled the way he'd preferred. She looked happy. She looked like a lie. Clara Marie Brennan, 34, the text read. Last seen February 15th near Winter Park. May be disoriented or in need of medical attention. Family is desperately worried. If you have any information, please contact Thomas's phone number. Thomas's email, below the contact information. In smaller text, substantial reward offered for information leading to her safe return. Clara read it 3 times, each word driving deeper into her chest like a knife. Maybe disoriented, in need of medical attention. The implication was clear. She wasn't a woman who'd left of her own free will. She was a victim, unstable, incompetent, someone who needed to be found and returned to her keeper. She tore the flyer down, crumpling it in her fist, and looked up and down the road. How many more of these had they posted? Had they been to town? Had they talked to people? How close was Thomas to finding her? Clara ran back to the cabin, her mind racing. She had to think, had to plan, the door banged open. She was so focused on the flyer in her hand that she didn't hear Abram approach. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, reading her face. Then his eyes dropped to the crumpled paper. "What's that?" Clara handed it to him without speaking. Her throat had closed up, making words impossible. Abram smoothed out the flyer and read it in silence. His expression didn't change, but Clara saw his jaw tighten, saw his hand curl into a fist around the paper. "Found this on the road?" he asked. "2 men in an SUV posted it about an hour ago. They didn't come close enough to see the cabin, but—" Clara's voice finally broke. "Abram, he's looking for me. He's putting up flyers like I'm a lost dog." Disoriented, Abram read, his voice flat. "In need of medical attention. He's painting you as incompetent. That's what he does. Did. That's how he controlled me, made me feel like I couldn't trust my own judgment, like I needed him to think for me." Clara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold, despite the warm afternoon. "If he finds me, he'll have me committed, or worse. He'll use this," she gestured at the flyer, "as proof that I'm not capable of making my own decisions." Abram set the flyer down on the table with deliberate care. When he looked at her, his eyes were hard, but his voice was gentle. "What do you want to do?" The question stopped her spiral. Not what should she do, or what he thought was best. What did she want? Clara thought about the woman in that wedding photo, smiling her fake smile. Thought about the woman who'd walked into these mountains ready to die. Then she thought about who she was now, capable, strong, whole. The woman who could split wood and set traps and survive. "I'm not going back," she said firmly. "I don't care what he does, what he says, what legal action he takes. I'm not going back to him." "Good," Abram said simply. "Then, but we need to be smart about this. If he's putting up flyers, he's serious. He might hire investigators, might come up here himself. What do I do?" Abram was quiet for a moment, thinking. "You could report yourself found. Tell the authorities you're safe, that you left of your own free will. That would stop the search, and give Thomas a way to find me. He'd show up here with lawyers and police and—" Clara shook her head. "I'm not ready to face him. I'm not ready to—" She stopped, looking at Abram. "I don't want to leave here." "Leave you? Then don't. But if he finds me, if he finds you, we deal with it together." Abram crossed the small space between them and took her hands. "You're not alone in this, Clara. You're not the same woman who left Denver. You're stronger now, and you're not facing him alone." Clara looked up at him, at this man who'd taught her how to survive, who'd shown her how to live again. "You'd really stand with me?" "Against Thomas. I stand between you and anything that tried to hurt you." His voice was absolutely certain. "You're mine now, and I protect what's mine." The words should have bothered her, the possessiveness, the presumption. But Clara heard what he really meant. "You're part of my life now. You matter. I won't let you be taken. He's powerful," she warned. "Rich, connected. He can make things difficult. Let him try." There was something in Abram's voice now, something cold and dangerous. "The soldier underneath the mountain man. I've faced worse than one entitled man who thinks he owns his wife." Clara released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "So what do? We keep living our lives. We prepare for the possibility that he might find you. And we make sure you're ready if that happens." Abram picked up the flyer again, studying it. "You're going to have to face him eventually. Divorce, legal separation, whatever. You can't hide forever. I know. I just need—" Clara struggled for words. "I need to be stronger first. I need to be sure I won't fall back into old patterns when he starts talking, when he starts making me doubt myself. Then we make you sure." Abram's thumb traced circles on her wrist, a gesture of comfort. "We keep training. Keep building your confidence. And when you're ready, when you're absolutely certain you can stand up to him without breaking, that's when we deal with it." Clara nodded slowly. It made sense. She wasn't ready yet, but she would be. With Abram's help, she would be. That evening they sat together by the fire, but the easy comfort of recent weeks was strained. The flyer sat on the table between them, a tangible reminder that the outside world hadn't forgotten about Clara Brennan. "Tell me about him," Abram said finally. "Your husband. Tell me what I need to know." So Clara told him about Thomas's charm, his intelligence, the way he could make people believe anything he wanted them to believe. About his need for control, his inability to accept anyone else's version of reality. About the gradual erosion of her identity until she barely recognized herself. "He's not violent," she said, "but he's dangerous in other ways. He'll use words like weapons. He'll make you doubt yourself, make you think you're the problem. He's very, very good at it." "He won't work on me," Abram said with absolute certainty. "How can you be sure?" "Because I know who you are. The real you. And nothing he says can change that." Abram pulled her close. "You're not the woman he describes in that flyer. You're not disoriented or incompetent. You're the woman who survived 3 days in a blizzard, who learned to split wood and set traps and fish in freezing water, who chose to live when dying would have been easier." Clara let herself lean into his strength, let herself believe his words. "What if he finds us? Then we deal with it together." Abram kissed the top of her head. "But Clara, when that day comes, and it probably will, you're going to have to be the one to face him. I can support you, can stand beside you, but ultimately this is your fight, your choice, your freedom." "I know." Clara looked at the flyer one more time, at her false smile in the wedding photo. "But I'm not her anymore. And that's what he won't understand. He's looking for the woman who left. But she doesn't exist anymore. No, Abram agreed. She doesn't. She became someone better. They burned the flyer in the fire that night, watched Clara's wedding photo curl and blacken and turn to ash. It felt symbolic, necessary, the destruction of who she'd been in favor of, who she'd become. But both of them knew the truth. Thomas was out there, searching, and sooner or later he would find them. The only question was whether Clara would be ready when he did. The weeks after the flyer felt different. Not worse exactly, but weighted. Like waiting for a storm. You could see building on the horizon, but couldn't predict when it would hit. Abram became more vigilant. He checked the perimeter daily, looking for signs of intruders. He taught Clara to recognize boot prints versus animal tracks, to spot disturbed undergrowth and broken branches that indicated human passage. Every evening he cleaned and checked his rifle, a ritual Clara had seen before, but now understood had taken on new significance. The rifle itself was beautiful in the way functional things could be. A lever-action Winchester, well-maintained and deadly accurate in Abram's hands. He'd had it for years, he told her. Used it for hunting, for protection against bears and mountain lions, for the kind of security that living alone in the wilderness required. Ever shot anyone with it? Clara asked one evening as she watched him run an oiled cloth down the barrel. No, but I would if I had to. The certainty in his voice was somehow comforting. Spring was advancing rapidly now. The snow had retreated to the highest peaks, leaving the valley green and alive. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows in riots of color, lupine and paintbrush and columbine. The stream ran high and clear, full of trout. The world was waking up, and with it came the reality that Clara couldn't hide forever, but something else was waking up too. Something between her and Abram that went beyond survival and companionship. They'd kissed that night by the fire, had held each other through dark hours when fear of Thomas finding them kept Clara awake. But they'd gone no further, as if both were waiting for something, permission maybe, or the right moment. The right moment came on a morning when the world seemed impossibly beautiful. Clara had gone to check the fish traps in the stream, a task she could now do without supervision. The water was cold enough to make her feet ache, but she didn't mind. She was pulling a fat trout from the trap when she heard Abram behind her. She turned to find him standing on the bank, watching her with an expression she'd learned to recognize. Hunger, but not for food. Want carefully controlled but undeniable. Catch anything good? He asked. Dinner, she said, holding up the fish. Maybe breakfast too, if we smoke some of it. Abram stepped into the water, boots and all, and crossed to where she stood. The current pushed at them, cold and insistent, but neither moved. He took the fish from her hands and tossed it on the bank, then pulled her close. Clara, he said. Her name, a question and a statement all at once. She answered by kissing him, and this time neither of them held back. His hands found her waist, her back, pulling her against him. Her fingers tangled in his hair, knocked loose the tie that held it back. They kissed like people who'd been starving, who'd finally allowed themselves to feel the depth of their hunger. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Abram rested his forehead against hers. Inside, he said roughly. Now. They stumbled back to the cabin, leaving the fish on the bank, leaving everything but each other. And there, in the warm safety of the home they'd built together, they became lovers in truth. It was tender and fierce and fumbling and perfect. Two damaged people finding wholeness in each other. Afterward, lying tangled together in Abram's bed, Clara traced the scars on his shoulder, where shrapnel had torn through muscle and bone. Does it still hurt? She asked. Sometimes, when the weather changes. But it doesn't matter. He caught her hand, brought it to his lips. You know what I thought when I found you in the snow? That I was an idiot for walking into a blizzard. That too. He smiled against her palm. But also that you were the bravest person I'd ever seen. Takes courage to walk away from your whole life. Takes even more courage to keep walking when you don't know where you're going. I was running away. No, you were running toward something. You just didn't know what yet. Clara shifted to look at him properly. And what was I running toward? This, us, a life where you could breathe. Abram's hand came up to cup her face. I love you, Clara. Should probably be scared of saying it, but I'm done being scared. The words hit her like a physical thing. warming her from the inside out. "I love you too. Have for a while now, I think. Maybe since you handed me that axe and expected me to keep up." They stayed in bed longer than they should have, making love again, talking, planning a future that felt both fragile and inevitable. But eventually, practicality reasserted itself. There was work to do, and lying around wouldn't get it done. Over the next week, their training took on new urgency. Abram taught Clara to shoot, first with the small .22 he used for rabbits, then with the Winchester. She had a good eye and steady hands, and within days she could hit a target at 50 yards. "Hopefully you'll never need this," Abram said, as Clara ejected the spent shells from the rifle. "But if Thomas shows up with trouble, I want you able to protect yourself." "Would I really shoot someone? Would you let someone hurt you or drag you back to a life that was killing you?" Clara thought about that, about Thomas and his controlled cruelty, his systematic dismantling of her identity, about how close she'd come to disappearing completely. "No," she said firmly, "I wouldn't." "Then you have your answer." He also taught her escape routes, showed her 3 different ways off the mountain, each leading to a different town, made her memorize landmarks and compass bearings, gave her a pack with essentials: water, food, matches, a knife, a map. "If something happens," he said seriously, "if I tell you to run, you run. Don't argue, don't hesitate. Promise me." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to say she'd never leave him. But she saw the fear underneath his insistence, the memory of losing everyone he'd cared about. So she promised. They fortified the cabin too. Abram showed her where he'd hidden spare weapons, installed better locks, created sight lines that would give them warning if anyone approached. It felt paranoid, but Clara remembered the SUV, the flyer, Thomas's determination to own what he considered his. Better paranoid than unprepared. One evening, 2 weeks after they'd become lovers, Clara was writing in her journal when she realized how much had changed. She flipped back to her first entries, tentative, scared, full of pain. Now her handwriting was stronger, more confident. Her words reflected a woman who knew herself, who'd found her strength. Day 74. "I can't remember what it felt like to be her. The woman in that wedding photo, it's not that the memories are gone, but they feel distant, like they happened to someone else. Maybe they did. Maybe that Clara died in the snow, and I'm someone new. Abram says I'm not new, just uncovered. Like I was buried under layers of what everyone else wanted me to be, and up here I've dug down to the truth. I think he's right. I'm not afraid of Thomas anymore. Or not the same way. I'm afraid of what him finding me might do to this life we've built. But I'm not afraid of him. Of his words, his judgment, his attempts to make me doubt myself. That power he had over me is gone. If he comes, when he comes, I'll be ready." She looked up to find Abram watching her from his chair by the fire. He'd been carving again, a habit he'd returned to since they'd become lovers. Whatever he was making, he kept it tilted away from her view. "What are you writing?" he asked, "about being ready. Are you ready?" Clara considered the question honestly. Was she ready to face Thomas? To stand her ground against his manipulation, his lawyers, his version of reality? "Yes," she said, and meant it. "I am," Abram nodded, satisfied. He returned to his carving, and Clara went back to her journal. But she felt different now, settled, sure. That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Clara's mind wouldn't quiet. She kept thinking about Thomas, about the inevitable confrontation, about what she'd say when he tried to take her back. "Abram," she whispered, "when Thomas finds us, and I think we both know he will, I need you to let me handle him." Abram's arm tightened around her waist. "What do you mean?" "I mean I need to face him myself. Stand up to him myself. If you do it for me, if you protect me from him, then I haven't really broken free. I'll always wonder if I could have done it on my own." Silence. "Then, you want me to just stand there while he tries to manipulate you?" "I want you to be there, to support me. But I need to be the one who tells him no, the one who draws the line." Clara turned in his arms to face him. "You've taught me how to survive. You've helped me remember who I am. But this last thing, standing up to Thomas, I have to do that myself." She felt more than saw Abram's nod in the darkness. All right. But if he touches you, if he threatens you, then you step in. But words? Manipulation? That's my battle. Deal! They fell silent again, and Clara felt something release in her chest. Fear, maybe, or the last vestige of doubt. She was ready. Whatever came, whoever came, she was ready. The next morning, Clara woke to find Abram already up, standing at the window with his rifle in hand. The morning light cast his face in shadow, making him look dangerous, remote. The soldier he'd been before the mountains claimed him. "What is it?" she asked, sitting up. "Tracks. Fresh ones." Circling the cabin from about 50 yards out. He didn't look at her, eyes scanning the tree line. "Someone was watching us last night." Clara's blood went cold. "Thomas!" "Don't know yet. But whoever it was, they're not here now. Left about 2 hours ago, best I can tell from the tracks." Clara got dressed quickly, her mind racing. If Thomas had found them, if he was watching, waiting, what do we do? She asked. Abram finally turned from the window. His expression was hard, determined, but she saw the worry underneath. "We prepare. Because I've got a feeling they're coming back. And soon." They came 3 days later, just as the afternoon sun began its descent behind the western peaks. Clara was at the stream, checking the fish traps, when she heard the vehicles. Plural, not one engine, but 2, maybe 3. The sound carried clearly in the mountain air, growing louder as they approached. She ran back to the cabin, her heart hammering. Abram was already on the porch, rifle in hand but lowered. Not threatening, but ready. He'd heard them too. "Inside," he said calmly. "Get the other rifle. Stay by the window where you can see, but they can't see you easy." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to stand beside him, but this was the plan they'd agreed on. She positioned herself at the window, rifle loaded. Hands surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. 2 vehicles pulled into the clearing, a black SUV and a silver sedan, both expensive and utterly out of place in the wilderness. 3 men emerged. 2 from the SUV wore dark pants and jackets, the kind of generic outdoor gear that screamed private security. They moved with the awareness of people trained to handle trouble. The 3rd man came from the sedan, and Clara's stomach dropped. Thomas. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall, fit, dressed in designer outdoor wear that probably cost more than Abram spent in a year. His hair was perfect despite the drive, his jaw set in that expression of determined righteousness she knew so well. He was playing the concerned husband, the man on a noble mission to save his troubled wife. Even from inside the cabin, even after everything, Clara felt the old programming kick in. The urge to apologize, to explain, to make herself smaller. Her hands tightened on the rifle. Thomas spotted Abram on the porch and stopped about 20 feet away. The 2 security men flanked him, hands visible but ready. "I'm looking for my wife," Thomas called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Clara Brennan. I have reason to believe she's here." Abram didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there with that infinite patience, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Thomas shifted his weight, a tiny tell that Clara recognized. He was thrown off by Abram's lack of reaction. People usually jumped to accommodate Thomas, to fill the silence with explanations and apologies. "Look," Thomas tried again, adjusting his tone to something more reasonable, more man-to-man. "I don't want any trouble. My wife's been missing for 3 months. She's not well. She needs help, medical attention. If she's here, she's here," Abram said, his voice flat. "And she's fine." Thomas's face flickered. Surprise, then calculation, then something harder. "I'd like to see her. Speak with her. That's up to her. She's my wife. She's her own person." The tension ratcheted up. One of the security men shifted his stance, and Abram's hand moved fractionally on the rifle. Not raising it, just adjusting. A reminder that he was armed and knew how to use it, Thomas noticed. His eyes narrowed, but he kept his voice level. "I understand you've been helping Clara. I appreciate that. But she needs professional care, not—" He gestured at the cabin, at Abram, at the whole situation. "This, whatever this is, what this is," Abram said slowly, "is none of your business. She left you. She's safe. She's making her own choices. That should be enough." "It's not enough." Thomas's careful mask was starting to slip. Clara could see the anger building, the frustration of a man who'd never been told no. She's not capable of making rational decisions right now. Anyone who walks away from her life, from her home, He looked around at the wilderness with barely concealed contempt. And to this is clearly not thinking straight, or Abram suggested. She's thinking straighter than she has in years. Thomas's hand moved to his wrist, adjusting his watch. Clara saw it clearly even from inside, a Rolex Platinum, probably $40,000. He'd bought it last year, she remembered. Showed it off at dinner parties, mentioned casually what it cost, used it as proof of his success. It was such a small gesture, but it told Clara everything. Thomas was nervous, off balance. He'd come expecting to find a broken woman who'd crawled into the woods to die. Instead, he'd found a cabin, a competent man with a rifle, and a situation he couldn't control. "I'm calling the sheriff," Thomas said, pulling out his phone. "This is kidnapping. You're holding her against her will. No service up here," Abram said. "Nearest cell tower's 20 miles that way." He gestured vaguely south. Thomas stared at his phone, at the no signal indicator, and something in his composure cracked. "This is ridiculous, Clara." He raised his voice, calling toward the cabin. "Clara, I know you're in there. Come out. Let's talk about this like adults." Inside, Clara stood frozen. This was it. The moment she'd been preparing for. She could stay hidden, let Abram handle this. Or she could do what she'd promised herself she'd do, face Thomas. Speak her truth, draw her line in the sand. She took a deep breath, set down the rifle and walked to the door. "Clara." "Wait," Abram started, but she was already stepping out onto the porch. Thomas saw her and his whole demeanor changed. His face softened, his eyes filled with concern. He took a step forward, arms opening, as if to embrace her. "Thank God," he said, his voice breaking perfectly. "Baby, I've been so worried. Are you okay? Has he hurt you?" Clara looked at her husband, this man she'd promised to love forever, who'd systematically destroyed her sense of self under the guise of caring for her. She looked at his expensive watch, and his perfect hair, and his concerned expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. And she felt nothing. No fear, no guilt, no urge to apologize or explain, just clarity. "Stop," she said, her voice steady and strong. "Don't come any closer." Thomas froze. For a second, genuine surprise flickered across his face. This wasn't the Clara he knew, the one who apologized for breathing. "Clara, please," he tried again. "Whatever's happened, whatever you think I've done, we can fix this. Come home, we'll get you help. Everything will be okay. I am home," Clara said. "And I don't need your help. I don't need you at all." The words hung in the mountain air, and Clara felt something inside her click into place. The last piece of the woman she'd become, Thomas's mask dropped completely. "You don't mean that." "I do. I'm not coming back, Thomas. Not now, not ever. Our marriage is over." Thomas's face went through a series of expressions, disbelief, anger, calculation. When he spoke again, his voice had taken on that edge Clara knew too well. The one that made her feel small and foolish and wrong. "You've been manipulated," he said, not looking at her anymore but at Abram. "This man has isolated you, confused you. It's a classic pattern. Stockholm Syndrome. You think you want this, but you're not in your right mind." "I'm more in my right mind than I've been in years," Clara said. Thomas ignored her, still focused on Abram. "What's your game here? Money? Think you can extort me for her return? Or is this something else, some backwoods fantasy of playing house with a vulnerable woman?" Abram's expression didn't change, but Clara felt his anger like a physical presence. Still, he kept his word. This was her fight, and he was letting her fight it. "Look at me, Thomas," Clara commanded. "Stop talking about me like I'm not here. Stop talking to him instead of me. I'm right here, and I'm telling you directly. I left you because staying was killing me. Everything else is just details." Thomas finally turned to her, and for the first time, Clara saw something like desperation in his eyes. "You're throwing away everything. Our home, our life, your reputation. For what? To live in a shack in the woods with some recluse?" "To live," Clara said simply. "Just to live, Thomas. Without being judged or controlled or told that everything I feel is wrong. Without being made to feel like I'm the problem all the time. You were the problem. The words burst out of him, raw and honest for once. Nothing I did was ever good enough. The house wasn't right. The parties weren't fun. I wasn't attentive enough. I didn't understand you. Do you know how exhausting it was, trying to make you happy? Clara felt something inside her break, not collapse, but break free, because Thomas had just confirmed what she'd always suspected. To him, she'd been a problem to solve, a defect to fix. Never a partner, never an equal. Then you should be relieved I left, she said quietly. Now you don't have to try anymore. One of the security men cleared his throat uncomfortably. Even they could see this wasn't what they'd signed up for. Not a rescue, but a divorce playing out in the wilderness. Thomas seemed to realize he was losing. His hand went to his watch again, that nervous tell, and when he spoke, his voice had shifted to something uglier. Fine. You want to stay here? Stay. But don't think you're getting a penny in the divorce. I'll make sure of that. And everyone will know you abandoned your marriage to shack up with some mountain man. Your family, our friends, everyone we know? I don't care. Clara realized as she said it that it was true. She didn't care what those people thought. Most of them had been Thomas's friends anyway. People who'd watched her disappear and said nothing. You will care when you're broke and alone. Thomas took a step forward. And everything happened fast. Abram moved, rifle coming up. The security men reached for their weapons, and Clara's hand went to the knife on her belt, the one Abram had given her weeks ago, the one she'd learned to use for everything from cleaning fish to cutting rope. She drew it now in one smooth motion, holding it low and ready, not threatening exactly, but making a point. She wasn't helpless. She wasn't defenseless. She wasn't the woman Thomas had known. Everyone froze. Don't, Clara said, her voice absolutely steady. Don't take another step. Don't touch me. Don't even think about it. Thomas stared at the knife in her hand, at the way she held it with confidence and competence, at the woman standing before him who looked nothing like the one he'd married. Her hands were rough and strong. Her stance was grounded. Her eyes were clear and unwavering. She was a stranger to him. And finally, he saw it. What happened to you? He asked, and for the first time he sounded genuinely lost. I survived, Clara said, and then I learned to live. That's what happened. Thomas looked at Abram, at the cabin, at the mountains rising behind them, then back at Clara. She saw the moment he accepted it, really accepted that she wasn't coming back, that this wasn't a phase or a breakdown or something he could fix. I'll have my lawyer contact you, he said stiffly, for the divorce proceedings. Fine. I want it noted that you abandoned the marriage. Note whatever you want. Thomas adjusted his watch one more time. A gesture of regaining control over something, anything. You're making a mistake. This fantasy you're living, it won't last. And when you realize that, when you come crawling back, I won't, Clara said. But even if I did, you wouldn't take me back. Because you never wanted me, Thomas. You wanted a possession, something beautiful and obedient that made you look good. I was never a person to you. Never an equal. And that's not love. That's ownership. The words hit their mark. Thomas flinched, and for just a second Clara saw past the anger and frustration to the insecurity underneath. Maybe in his own twisted way he had loved her, or thought he did. But it had been the kind of love that smothered and controlled, that couldn't distinguish between caring for someone and owning them. Goodbye. Thomas, Clara said with finality. He stood there for another moment, as if waiting for her to change her mind, to break down, to become the Clara he'd known. When she didn't, he turned and walked back to his car. The security men followed, clearly relieved this was ending without violence. One of them gave Abram a slight nod, professional recognition maybe, or respect for how he'd handled the situation. The vehicles started up, turned around, and drove away. Clara and Abram stood on the porch until the sound of engines faded completely, until even the dust had settled. Then, and only then, did Clara's hands start to shake. Abram took the knife gently from her grip and pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against him, not crying exactly, but releasing the tension of months, of years, of a lifetime of making herself small. You did it, Abram murmured into her hair. You stood up to him. Didn't back down, didn't apologize, didn't let him make you doubt yourself. I didn't, did I? Clara laughed, a sound somewhere between relief and disbelief. I actually did it. You did. And he's gone. Really gone. Clara pulled back to look at him. Did you see his face? When I pulled the knife, he couldn't believe it. He didn't know you, Abram said simply. The real you, the strong you. But I do. Clara kissed him, pouring everything into it, gratitude and love and relief and triumph. When they separated, she felt lighter than she had in years. Maybe ever. What now? She asked. Abram smiled. That rare, full smile that transformed his face. Now we go inside. Have dinner. Live our lives. Together. Together. Clara agreed. And they did. 3 weeks after Thomas left, Clara stood in the garden plot behind the cabin, her hands deep in the rich mountain soil. The sun was warm on her back, and the air smelled of pine and earth and growth. Around her, the first seedlings were pushing through, lettuce and carrots and beans that would feed them through the summer. Life had returned to its rhythm, but it felt different now. Lighter. There was no shadow hanging over them, no threat waiting around the corner. Thomas was filing for divorce in Denver, and Clara had found a lawyer willing to handle everything remotely. She didn't contest anything, didn't want the house or the money or any piece of that life. She just wanted free. And soon she would be. Abram appeared from the tree line, a string of trout over his shoulder and something tucked under his arm. Clara wiped her hands on her pants and stood to meet him. Good fishing? She asked. Real good. Enough for tonight and tomorrow. He held up the wrapped bundle. Also finished something. Clara's curiosity sparked. Abram had been working on a project for the past week, disappearing into his workshop for hours at a time. He'd been secretive about it, which wasn't like him. He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a wooden sign, beautifully carved and sanded smooth. 2 names were burned into the wood in elegant script, Abram and Clara. Below that, in smaller letters, Home. Clara's breath caught. Abram figured it was time to make it official, he said, suddenly shy in a way that made her heart squeeze. This is your home now, our home. Thought it should say so. She traced the letters with one finger, feeling the smooth grooves where his knife had carefully carved their names together. It's perfect. They hung it together on the front of the cabin, right beside the door. When they stepped back to look at it, Clara felt something settle deep in her chest. This was real. This life, this love, this home they'd built from nothing, it was solid and true and hers. I need to tell you something, Clara said. Abram looked at her, a flicker of concern crossing his face. What? I talked to my sister yesterday. Called from town when I went for supplies. Clara had reconnected with her family a week ago, nervous about their reaction. She wants to visit. To meet you. To see that I'm really okay. And I said yes. Is that okay? She's flying into Denver next month. We'll rent a car and drive up. Just for the weekend. Abram was quiet for a moment, and Clara knew what he was thinking. He'd been alone so long, had built his life around solitude. The idea of visitors, of integrating with her family, with the world, it had to be overwhelming. Yeah, he said finally. Yeah, that's okay. She's important to you. I want to meet her. Clara kissed him, grateful for his willingness to stretch, to grow, to let people back into his carefully constructed isolation. Thank you. That evening they sat on the porch and watched the sun set behind the western peaks. The air was cooling but still comfortable, full of the promise of summer. Birds called from the trees, and somewhere in the distance an elk bugled. You ever regret it? Abram asked. Leaving your old life? Clara thought about Denver, about the big house and the country club, and the version of herself she'd performed every day. She thought about Thomas and his control and the slow suffocation of pretending to be happy. Not even for a second, she said. Do you regret finding me? Best thing I ever did. He pulled her closer. Thought I was done, you know. Thought I'd live out my days up here alone, and that would be enough. But it wasn't enough. I was just too scared to admit it, and now I'm done being scared. He kissed the top of her head. Got too much to live for. Clara pulled out her journal. She still wrote every evening, documenting this life they were building. She opened to a fresh page and began to write. Day 103. The sign went up today. Our names carved together. Abram and Clara, home. I've been thinking about what home means. It's not a place really, or not just a place. It's the feeling of being known, fully known and accepted anyway. It's work that matters, and hands that are strong, and a body that feels like mine again. It's Abram's voice in the morning, and his arms at night, and the way he looks at me like I'm capable of anything. It's the garden growing, and the fish in the stream, and the mountains standing eternal around us. It's waking up and not being afraid of the day ahead. It's going to sleep and not dreading tomorrow. It's the simple, profound gift of being yourself without apology. I walked into these mountains to die, but I found life instead. Real life, not the performance I'd been giving for years. And the strange thing is, I had to lose everything to find it. Had to strip away all the pretense and the expectations and the fear until there was nothing left but the truth of who I am. That woman in the wedding photo, I don't hate her anymore. I understand her now. She was doing the best she could with what she knew. But she's gone, and I'm glad. Because in her place is someone stronger, someone real, someone who knows that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about living with intention and purpose and love. Clara paused and looked at Abram. He was carving again. He'd started a new project, something larger this time. An owl, she thought, though it was hard to tell in the early stages. What are you writing? He asked, catching her watching him. About home, about us. About how sometimes the thing you're running from is exactly what leads you to the thing you needed all along. That's pretty philosophical for a Wednesday evening. Clara laughed. I'm allowed to be philosophical. I'm happy. Happy people get philosophical, are you? Happy? She set down her journal and moved to sit beside him, leaning against his shoulder. Happier than I knew was possible. You? Yeah. He set down his carving and wrapped his arm around her. Yeah, I am. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. The mountains were black silhouettes against the deep blue of twilight, and the first cool breeze of evening stirred the pines. Clara thought about the long journey that had brought her here, the years of slow suffocation, the desperate flight into the mountains, the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. She thought about Abram and his grief, his isolation, the way they'd saved each other without even meaning to. She thought about the future, summers in the garden, winters by the fire, a life built on mutual respect and real love. Her sister's visit next month, and maybe more visits after that. Slowly, carefully, building bridges back to the world while keeping this sanctuary intact. It wouldn't always be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But it would be real and honest and theirs. Abram, she said into the gathering darkness. Yeah? Thank you. For everything. For teaching me how to survive, but also for teaching me how to live. His arm tightened around her. You taught yourself. I just showed you where to look. We taught each other then. Yeah, I think we did. The stars multiplied overhead, millions of them in the clear mountain air. Clara had never seen so many stars in Denver. The light pollution had washed them out, made the sky flat and empty. But up here, the universe revealed itself in all its vast, glittering glory. She felt small beneath it, but not in a bad way. Small in the way that reminded her she was part of something larger, something ancient and ongoing. The mountains had stood for millions of years and would stand for millions more. The streams would run, the seasons would turn, life would persist, and in the middle of it all, two people who'd been lost had found each other, had built something worth keeping in a cabin at the edge of nowhere. Clara stood and offered Abram her hand. Come on, let's go inside. He took her hand and rose, and together they walked toward the cabin, toward the warm glow of firelight through the windows, toward the life they'd chosen and the love they'd earned. As they reached the door, Clara glanced up at the sign one more time. Abram and Clara, home. She smiled and stepped inside, Abram right behind her, closing the door against the night. The mountains stood silent watch, and the cabin glowed warm in the darkness. And two people who'd learned what it meant to survive discovered something even better, what it meant to truly, fully, completely live.